Aurora Brown and intersectional psychology acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout South Africa and their connections to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Indigenous people listening today. Intersectional psychology. Intersectional Scenes, Episode 1. Does your favorite film pass the Fanon Test? Hello, and welcome back to Intersectional Psychology, the podcast that explores psychology's role in promoting social justice. I'm your host, Aurora Brown. I'm a registered counsellor in Cape Town, South Africa. And I am also someone who often rolls my eyes at the depiction of mental health on TV and in films. And related to that, today we are embarking on a new and exciting journey for this podcast. But first, how are you? What is going on? I find that what helps manage my fear and anxiety is spending time in community and getting involved in activism and local organizing. Look out for ways to get involved in your community. You can also support the Triangle Project or the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which are two causes very close to my heart. Whatever you do, we are all in this together. Intersectional psychology is made possible with and by your support. Thanks to everyone who supports the podcast on Patreon. Your subscription gets you bonus episodes, extended cuts, and other goodies. As an independent media creator, I really appreciate your support. But now, back to the new project I mentioned for this podcast. I am launching a periodic series called Intersectional Scenes, where my guests and I will dive deep into a piece of popular media. Films, TV shows, maybe even music and books, to analyze how it represents mental health, therapy, psychologists, and crucially, the marginalized communities who are so often harmed or misunderstood by these portrayals. To launch this series, in this episode, I want to introduce a new and critical tool that we'll be using for mental health representation in media. It's a 5-point evaluation system I've developed called the Fanon Test. And yes, it's named after Frantz Fanon, the psychiatrist, the revolutionary, and a pioneer of decolonization and post-colonial studies. In this episode, we'll explore why this kind of analysis is so desperately needed and how media representations directly impact our collective psyche, the collective unconscious, if you will, and real-world stigma. By the end of it, I'll have walked you through what the Fanon test is, why it matters, and how you can use it to evaluate what you're watching. But first, let's get into the psychology of media itself. Media shapes minds. The power of representation. Why it matters. To understand why we need a tool like the Fanon Test, we first have to acknowledge that media is never just entertainment. It's a matter of psychological and social consequence. As Stuart Hall reminded us, representation is not simply a reflection of reality, but a construction of it. It's how we make sense of the world and our place in it. What we see on screen tells us what is quote-unquote normal, what is dangerous, what is heroic, and what is monstrous. It trains us into judging who deserves empathy. Psychologists have studied this for decades. Gerbner's enduring 1973 cultivation theory tells us that media cultivates our worldview. Watch enough jingoistic movies or propaganda TV shows and you'll start believing in the value of war and punitive justice. Social learning theory explains how we copy behavior from what we see on screen. Not just kids learning karate moves from Power Rangers, but adults learning who deserves compassion and who doesn't. And research confirms this. One major review by Sanson and colleagues showed that portrayals of violence, crime, and especially mental illness shape our perceptions in powerful ways. When the media overrepresents crime by people with mental illness, audiences internalize the idea that people with psychiatric diagnoses are dangerous, even though they are far more likely to be victims than perpetrators. Think about it. For many people, their primary exposure to concepts like psychosis, dissociative identity disorder, or even a simple therapy session doesn't come from a textbook or a lived experience. It comes from a movie like Split, or a TV show like The Sopranos or Hannibal. Other studies show that portrayals of psychologists and therapy directly affect whether people seek help. If the shrink on TV is unethical, bumbling, or exploitative, surprise, surprise, people in real life are less likely to trust therapy. And when characters who seek help are mocked as weak, audiences internalize that too. That's what psychologists call self-stigma, the belief that you're somehow less than for asking for support. Work by Mayer and colleagues in 2014 shows that this is a huge barrier to people seeking help. If every character on screen who sees a therapist is depicted as a trope like the manipulative genius, the violent monster, or the pathetic loser, why would anyone want to be one of them? These portrayals have real-world effects. I've included links to research in the show notes, and these references spell this out with stark clarity. Media portrayals significantly influence individuals' beliefs and understandings about health and illness, diversity, and difference. The paradox is striking. Audiences are fascinated by mental health stories. From Frasier to Good Will Hunting to Euphoria, we eat this content up. Yet many people still hesitate to seek help for themselves, partly because of the very portrayals they've absorbed. It's like we're hooked on the drama but allergic to the dignity. Or maybe the vulnerability. It takes humility and courage to seek help. And let's be clear, this doesn't affect everyone equally. Intersectionality reminds us that when you're already marginalized by race, gender, sexuality, or disability, these stereotypes land harder. They reinforce existing prejudices and amplify existing barriers to care. As Nairn and colleagues argued in 2006, the harm of consistently distorted and stigmatized depictions is compounded when the person with a mental health condition is also Black, queer, transgender, or disabled, groups that are disproportionately represented as villains. The media often engages in what Pumla de Neogocola calls the othering of bodies, scrutinizing and dehumanizing those who exist at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities. But media doesn't just influence lay people, it also shapes the perceptions of professionals and informs health promotion strategies. When our cultural stories about mental health are rooted in stereotype and sensationalism, our entire societal response is stunted. We prioritize individual, medicalized, pathologizing solutions over understanding the systemic oppressive forces, the racism, the patriarchy, the colonialism that are so often at the root of collective mental distress. So when I say media matters, I mean it literally. Representation can harm or it can heal. Ethical, accurate, intersectional representation of mental health is public health. This isn't just about getting the facts right. It's about justice. It's about challenging what Ignacio Martín-Baró called the institutionalized lies that maintain social inequity. It's about decolonizing our imagination. Introducing the Fanon Test. So, what do we do about this? How do we move from being passive consumers to active, critical interrogators of the media we consume? You might already be familiar with the Bechdel Test, also known as the Bechdel-Wallace test. It started in a 1985 comic strip by Alison Bechdel, who credits her friend Liz Wallace with the idea. And the more progressive evolution of the test asks just 4 simple questions about a film. 1. Does it have at least 2 women or people of marginalized genders? 2. Do both women have names? 3. Do they talk to each other? And 4. Is the conversation about something other than a man, and preferably something significant to the plot? The Bechdel test has become extremely influential and has inspired many adaptations, from the Mako-Mori test, the Kumbalangi test, and Johansson analysis of gender representation, to the Vito Russo test for the representation of LGBTQIA+ identities, the Riz test for representation of Muslims, and the Duvernay and Latif tests for the representation of marginalized ethnicities in media. The Bechdel test is not a perfect measure of feminism on screen. Plenty of terrible films technically pass. But the point of the Bechdel test is bigger than the checklist. Tests like the Bechdel-Wallace test or the Duvernay test gave us language to critique gender and racial representation. It's a way of naming the patterns that we see, showing just how often women or people of color are erased or flattened in storytelling. When I thought about starting this series analyzing pieces of media, I thought there must be a similar sort of framework for the representation of mental health, but there wasn't, or at least I couldn't find one. So I've developed a new test, the Fanon Test for mental health representation in media. Instead of focusing on gender, it zooms in on the presence and the quality of mental health representation. It's not a checklist of perfection, it's just a tool for accountability and a way of asking better questions. And why name it Fanon? Because Frantz Fanon wasn't just a revolutionary thinker, he was a psychiatrist and a leader in the field of post-colonialism from Martinique in the West Indies. His work, particularly in Black Skin, White Masks and The Wretched of the Earth, exposed how colonialism damages mental health and how racism and oppression live in the psyche as much as in politics. Fanon understood that mental health cannot be separated from the power structures that shape our lives. Naming this test after him is my way of grounding it in that legacy. Now, the goal of the Fanon test is not to dismiss media that fails it, but to use it as a starting point for a deeper, more intersectional conversation. This is the heart of our new Intersectional Scenes series on the podcast. Breaking down the 5 scales. The Fanon test consists of 5 scales, each with one question contributing 1 point, leading to a total score out of 5. But remember, the score is just a gateway. The real value is in the discussion that each point generates. Each scale of the test is also named after a thinker who has contributed profoundly to decolonizing and intersectional approaches to mental health and society. So, here are the 5 scales. Firstly, we have the Cooper scale, named in honor of the South African psychologist, anti-apartheid activist, and former political prisoner Sata Sivian Cooper. The question for this scale is, are mental health phenomena depicted and named with clarity? This is the basic literacy test. Does the media get the facts right, or does it use mental health as a vague, spooky plot device? Does the story identify the psychological root of a character's behavior, or does it ignore the fact that someone might be struggling with grief or depression or addiction, and instead just throw around labels like unreliable or a Debbie Downer or psychotic, as if that explains everything? A point on this scale means the portrayal is accurate and avoids sensationalism. A 0 is a film like M. Night Shyamalan's Split, which grotesquely misrepresents and misidentifies dissociative identity disorder as a pathway to supernatural violent abilities. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy the campiness and twist endings and batshit banana soup of M. Night Shyamalan's films just as much as the next horror girly, but I can still critique the psychological elements when his films go completely off the rails. And that's the point of the Fanon Test. Not to dump on our favorite films and TV shows, but to be critical of them. Secondly, we have the Hill-Collins scale, named for the groundbreaking Black feminist scholar Patricia Hill-Collins, who gave us the concept of controlling images. The question is, are characters shown as whole people beyond their diagnosis or stereotype? This scale fights against reductionism. Are characters with mental health conditions defined solely by their illness, existing only to be a victim, a monster, or a lesson for the protagonist? Or do they have desires, relationships, a history, and agency that exist outside of their diagnosis? Can a character with depression also have a career, a family, a sense of humor? Or are they reduced to the depressed one? Or even worse, the depressing one? A point on this scale means the character is a complex human being. A 0 means they are merely a plot device. Thirdly, we have the Crenshaw scale, named, of course, after the legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality. The question for this scale is, does the story acknowledge and challenge the intersecting systems of power shaping mental health? This is the core of intersectional analysis. Does the narrative understand that mental distress is not born in a vacuum? Does it connect a character's anxiety to racial trauma? Does it show how poverty, homophobia, or ableism limit access to care or create distress in the first place? A point on this scale means the story moves beyond an individual biomedical model to a social and political one. A 0 means it treats mental health as a purely personal chemical issue. The fourth scale is the Childs scale, named for anthropologist and psychoanalyst E. Kitch Childs, who worked to decolonize therapeutic practice. The question for this scale is if it depicts mental health professionals or therapeutic processes, including indigenous or informal ones, are these represented accurately and respectfully? This scale critiques the portrayal of the quote-unquote expert and the process of healing itself. Is the therapist an ethical, boundaried professional or a manipulative villain? Is therapy shown as a collaborative relationship in process or just a caricature of a Freudian stereotype, a hypnotic interrogation? Are indigenous practices tokenized or exoticized, or are they treated with dignity and accuracy? A point on this scale means the dynamic is based on trust and integrity. A 0 is the unethical, coercive therapist trope seen in so many horror films or soap operas. And lastly, the fifth scale is the Martín-Baró scale, named for Salvadorian psychologist and pioneer of liberation psychology, Ignacio Martín-Baró. The question for the scale is, does the story invite meaningful engagement with ethical issues without reinforcing stigma? This scale assesses the ultimate impact of the narrative. A story can be dark and explore difficult themes, but what is its final message? Does it generate empathy and critical thought about justice and treatment? Or does it simply reinforce old harmful prejudices? A point on this scale means the story, even if tragic, engages in questions around boundaries, institutionalization, or duties of care, and might challenge systemic issues. Applying the test. Let's take a very brief hypothetical example. Imagine we're analyzing a film about a war veteran with PTSD. Looking at the Cooper scale, if it portrays flashbacks, hypervigilance, and emotional numbness, are these portrayals accurate, and are they framed in the context of PTSD? Or is it just quote-unquote angry and violent? Let's say it does a good job, then it gets 1 point. Next, we look at the Hill-Collins scale. Is the veteran only a vessel for her trauma? Or do we see her as a mother, a friend with hobbies and a history beyond the war? Let's assume we do, then it gets another point. On the Crenshaw scale, does the film critique the military-industrial complex that sent her to war in the first place? Does it show the lack of support for veterans? Or does it frame her PTSD as a purely personal battle? If it ignores the systemic causes, then it's a 0. If she sees a therapist, is that therapist shown to be competent and caring, or overwhelmed and dismissive? If it portrays a therapist that lives up to their ethical responsibilities and scope of practice, then it gets a point. Finally, on the Martín-Baró scale, does the film explore what responsibility the veteran's employer, that is the government, have for her mental health care? Or the duties of society towards veterans? Or any ethical dilemmas encountered in the therapeutic process? If yes, then it gets another point. So, this hypothetical film would score a 4 out of 5 on the Fanon Test. It's mostly good on the individual and clinical levels, but it misses a crucial opportunity to engage with the political and systemic causes of trauma. That's the nuanced conversation this test is designed to spark. A way of noticing, naming, and challenging the patterns that shape our collective imagination. Looking ahead at intersectional scenes. The Fanon Test is a work in progress, a tool for a conversation. It's designed to help us be more critical, more engaged, and more compassionate consumers of media. Which brings me to what's next. This episode kicks off a new series on intersectional psychology called Intersectional Scenes. In this series, I'll be joined by guests to apply this test to specific pieces of media. We'll be putting films, TV shows, maybe even music and books through the Fanon Test. We'll ask, who gets to be whole? Who gets flattened into a trope? And what does that say about the world we're building together? We'll celebrate what the media gets right and rigorously critique what it gets wrong, always through this intersectional, decolonial lens. I don't want this to be a one-way street. I'd love to hear from you. What shows or films should we test? Which portrayals made you feel seen? And which ones made you squirm? Representation is never neutral. It shapes how we see others and how we see ourselves. Our mental health discourse is in crisis, and the stories we tell about it matter. They matter for the person afraid to seek help because of stigma. They matter for the communities whose suffering is rendered invisible. Thank you so much for joining me for this introduction to the Fanon Test and the Intersectional Scenes series. To recap, media matters because it cultivates beliefs and behaviors. When it comes to mental health, representation can either dismantle stigma or reinforce it. The Fanon Test is one way to evaluate whether a story is doing the work, naming clearly, portraying people fully, acknowledging power, respecting therapeutic processes, and engaging ethically. If you have suggestions for media we should analyze on a future episode, please reach out to me at Intersectional Psychology on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, or on email. My address is intersectionalpsychologypod@gmail.com. Look after yourself. And remember, everyone deserves to live with their optimal mental health. Thank you for listening to Intersectional Psychology. Please follow or subscribe to the podcast to get every episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Intersectional Psychology in your preferred app. It really helps other people find the podcast. This episode of Intersectional Psychology was researched, written, recorded, and edited by me, Aurora Brown. For a transcript of this episode, please see the link in the show notes on your podcast app or go to intersectionalpsychology.com. You can also check the website or the show notes for a full list of references for this episode. A video of this episode with closed captions is available on youtube.com/@intersectionalpsychology. To support this podcast and get access to bonus content, including additional episodes and interviews, as well as more guided mindfulness sessions, please go to patreon.com/intersectionalpsychology. You can also chat with me on Blue Sky at intersectpsy.bsky.social and Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Intersectional Psychology, but mostly Blue Sky. Aurora Brown and Intersectional Psychology are committed to the Cite Black Women praxis. All episodes of Intersectional Psychology are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I, Aurora Brown, am not able to answer specific questions about individual situations. Always seek the advice of your health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen on this podcast. If you think you need immediate assistance, please call your local emergency number or any mental health crisis hotline. Everyone deserves good mental health.